The virus was injected. The lie was told. We often hear people praise Machiavellian thinking as the pinnacle of strategic intelligence. We are told that to succeed in the real world, you must be ruthless. That to hold power, you must manipulate. But today, we are going to flip that script. From the perspective of modern neuroscience and game theory, Machiavellianism is not a superpower. It is a piece of malware. It is a malicious code installed in the operating system of the human brain that exploits our most primitive security vulnerabilities: fear and insecurity. To prove this, we are not going to talk about abstract theory. We are going to dissect one of the greatest power struggles in human history. On one side stands Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king. The man who wrote Meditations, not for fame, but to keep his own sanity intact. He represents the pinnacle of high executive function, reason, and duty. On the other side stands Avidius Cassius, the ire general, the governor of the East. He represents the seduction of dark psychology, pragmatism, and raw ambition. Let's rewind the clock to the year 175 AD. The Roman Empire was not the pristine paradise of white marble statues you see in Hollywood movies. It was a nightmare. A plague, known today as the Antonine Plague, was tearing through the population. It was an apocalypse. Soldiers were coughing out blood in the streets. The skin of the infected turned black and blistered. The army was so decimated by disease that Marcus Aurelius had to recruit gladiators and slaves just to man the walls. On the northern frontier, along the frozen banks of the Danube River, the barbarian tribes sensed weakness. They were hammering the gates of civilization. The empire was crumbling, and the one man holding it all together, Marcus Aurelius, was dying. He had fallen ill at a forward operating base. His body, frail after decades of constant warfare and stress, was finally shutting down. To his inner circle, Marcus was a living saint, a man sacrificing his life for the state. But to one man, he was something else entirely. That man was Avidius Cassius. But be careful here. If you picture Cassius as a cartoon villain twirling his mustache, you have already lost. You cannot understand the anti-Machiavelli protocol if you do not understand the seduction of the Machiavellian mind. Cassius was not a monster. He was a military genius. He was the hero of the Parthian War. When others hesitated, Cassius marched his legions down the Tigris River. He was the one who burned the great city of Seleucia to the ground. He brought victory when Rome needed it most. In the eyes of Avidius Cassius, Marcus Aurelius was a good man, but a terrible king for wartime. Cassius watched Marcus writing philosophy in his tent by candlelight while the barbarians screamed in the forests. He saw Marcus's mercy as softness. He saw his patience as indecision. Cassius possessed a mindset of extreme pragmatism. He truly believed that in times of chaos, Rome did not need a philosopher who forgave his enemies. It needed a lion who devoured them. And then, the opportunity struck. An infection vector entered the system. A rumor flew from the northern camps all the way to the governor's palace in the east. The message was simple. Marcus Aurelius is dead. Normally, a loyal subject would verify the intel. They would wait for the official courier, or at the very least, they would take a moment to mourn the loss of their friend. But Cassius's brain did not work that way. As soon as the signal hit his neural network, instinct took over. He didn't verify. Attaque. This brings us to the glitch in his mind. Men like Cassius suffer from a specific delusion common among the powerful. The belief that they are the only ones real enough to act. He didn't see his betrayal as treason. He saw it as a rescue mission. He convinced himself of a convenient lie, that without his iron hand, the empire would collapse. He stood before his generals and rationalized his treason with a moral shield. He told them that Marcus was dead, and even if he wasn't, the empire could not survive another day of such weak leadership. He claimed the Senate asked him to intervene. He built a fortress of lies to protect his own ego. Look at his first strategic move. It was brilliant, and it was cold. He didn't march his armies to Rome to be crowned. No, he immediately seized control of Egypt. Why Egypte? Because Egypt was the breadbasket of the ancient world. It produced the grain that fed the teeming millions in the city of Rome. By taking Egypt, Cassius wasn't just claiming territory. He was putting a blade to the throat of the empire. He was controlling the food supply. This is the thinking of a zero-sum game player. In his worldview, power is a finite resource. For him to win, Marcus had to lose. For him to rise, the current order had to die. He couldn't conceive of a scenario where coexistence was possible. The Eastern legions, the most battle-hardened troops in the world, swore allegiance to him. They believed in strength. They were tired of the plague, tired of the philosophical drift. They wanted a winner. Cassius was at the peak of his confidence. He thought he had calculated every variable. He thought the game was over. But there was one variable Cassius failed to account for. A variable that the Machiavellian brain is often blind to because it considers it a weakness. The truth. The rumor was false. Marcus Aurelius was not dead. He woke up. The fever broke. And the first news he received on his recovery bed was not a letter of celebration from his oldest friend, but a report of high treason. Avidius Cassius, the man he had trusted with absolute power over the East, had declared himself emperor and stolen the grain supply. At this precise moment, history held its breath. Put yourself in the tent with Marcus. You are weak. You are recovering from a near-death experience. You have just been stabbed in the back by a brother. Your biological reaction, your primal instinct, would be to rage. Your amygdala would be screaming for blood. You would want to purge every traitor, burn the East to ash, and make an example of Cassius that would last 1,000 years. That is, the fight-or-flight response. If Marcus had gotten angry, he would have walked right into Cassius's trap, because Cassius is a master of violence. If Marcus chose violence, he would be playing on Cassius's home turf. He would turn this into a standard civil war between two power-hungry warlords. And more importantly, if Marcus raged, he would prove Cassius right. He would prove that under the philosophical mask, he was just another scared, insecure tyrant protecting his chair. But Marcus Aurelius was not a normal man. He was a practicing Stoic. In the freezing cold of the north, facing the collapse of his life's work, Marcus sat in silence. Inside his mind, a war was raging. A war between the reptilian urge to destroy and the human capacity to reason. He knew that Cassius had made a fatal error, but he also knew that if he reacted wrongly, Rome would burn. The civil war had begun. Not with swords, but with psychology. Cassius had fired the first shot by weaponizing fear and lies. Now, the world waited to see how the philosopher would respond. Would he break, or would he reveal a new kind of power that Cassius could not comprehend? To understand the counterattack, we first have to watch the virus destroy its host. We need to see why. When the truth came out, Cassius didn't surrender. We need to understand why he doubled down on the lie. The signal has cleared. The noise has stopped. The truth is out. Marcus Aurelius is alive. At this precise moment, the simulation changes. In game theory, this is known as a bifurcation point, a critical junction where a single decision determines the survival of the system. A rational player, looking at the board, would realize the game is lost. The logical move is to deal. Cassius could have claimed he was misled by false reports. He could have blamed the fog of war. He could have surrendered to spare his legions from a pointless death. But Avidius Cassius did none of those things. Instead, he initiated a psychological sequence we now call the sunk cost fallacy. He decided that he had already invested too much treason to turn back. He didn't hit the brakes. He slammed on the accelerator. Why? Why does a genius choose self-destruction over logic? To understand this, we have to look at the psychology of a cornered predator. When the news of Marcus's survival hit Cassius, he didn't think. He panicked. The primal fear took over. His logic center shut down, and the animal instinct to survive clawed its way to the surface. In modern psychology, we call this an amygdala hijack. It's not just a fancy term. It's a state of being. Imagine the feeling of almost getting into a car accident. The tunnel vision, the racing heart, the inability to process complex thoughts. Now, imagine feeling that 24 hours a day. That was Cassius. He was no longer the brilliant governor of Syria. Biologically speaking, he was operating on the raw hardware of a scared animal. He doubled down on the lie, but he had to change the narrative to justify it. He stood before his legions in the opulent city of Antioch and delivered a new message. He declared that even if Marcus was alive, the man was unfit to rule. He used a very specific, very telling insult. He called Marcus a philosophical old woman. That phrase is a psychological fingerprint. In psychoanalysis, we call this projection. Cassius was a man of hard power. He defined his worth by his ability to inflict violence. But, deep down, like all tyrants, he feared that his brutality was actually a sign of sophisticated so he glued that label onto Marcus. He tried to frame Marcus's wisdom as weakness. He tried to frame Marcus's mercy as cowardice. But lying carries a heavy price. Neuroscience shows us that the human brain is wired for truth. Telling the truth is effortless. It's simply retrieving stored data from memory. But lying is a full-time job. To maintain a lie of this magnitude, Cassius entered a state of massive cognitive overload. Think about the mental energy required. He had to invent a false reality where he was the hero. He had to suppress the truth constantly. He had to monitor the facial expressions of thousands of soldiers, looking for doubt. He had to remember which lie he told to which general. He had to predict every possible counter-argument Marcus might make. It is a mental house of cards. One slip, and it all falls down. The atmosphere in his camp began to change. To maintain the lie, he had to increase the pressure. He became paranoid. If a general whispered in a corner, Cassius assumed it was a plot. If a messenger arrived late, Cassius assumed betrayal. He likely ordered purges. He demanded absolute, terrifying loyalty. This is the fatal paradox of the Machiavellian leader. The more you rule by fear, the more afraid you become. You create a feedback loop of paranoia. Cassius was no longer sleeping. He was constantly scanning for threats that didn't exist. He was burning through his psychological resources just to keep the illusion alive. The soldiers in the East, veterans who had followed him into hell, started to smell the fear on him. Humans are social animals. We have evolved over millions of years to detect safety signals from our leaders. Cassius was emitting the opposite. He was emitting signals of instability. The man of iron was rusting before their eyes. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, the scene could not be more different. Let's look at the contrast. Cassius is in Antioch, a city of silk, spices, and golden palaces. It is the center of luxury and soft power. Marcus Aurelius is on the Danube frontier. Picture the scene. It is a gray, frozen wasteland. The ground is churning with mud and ice. The wind howls through the wooden palisades of the Roman camp. This is not a place for luxury. It is a place of iron and blood. The news of the betrayal hits the camp like a thunderclap. It doesn't just reach the emperor, it reaches Rome. The Senate is in a panic. Senators are running through the streets, terrified that Cassius will march on the capital and execute them. They declare Cassius a public enemy in a desperate attempt to show loyalty. The entire empire is trembling. But inside the emperor's tent, the atmosphere is electric. The generals are furious. These are men who have spent years fighting barbarians. They know only one language: war. They are sharpening their swords. They want to march east. They want to burn Antioch to the ground. They are screaming for the order to strike. This is the natural human reaction. It is a desire for justice. It is the rage of the betrayer. But Marcus Aurelius sits in silence. He is not suppressing his emotions like a robot. That is a misunderstanding of Stoicism. He feels the anger. He feels the heartbreak of being stabbed in the back by his best friend. But he possesses a discipline that Cassius lacks. He has built what the Stoics call the inner citadel. He forces his breath to slow down. He silences the screaming animal inside and lets reason take the wheel. He performs a cognitive He realizes that if he gets angry, he loses. If he marches on the east with fire and fury, he validates Cassius's narrative. He proves that he is just another warlord protecting his throne. He proves that power is just a contest of who can kill the most people. Marcus didn't want to win a civil war. He wanted to transcend it. He understood that Cassius was not a monster, but a victim of his own ambition. He looked at the situation, not with hatred, but with a strange, clinical pity. He realized that the only way to defeat a man driven by fear is not with more fear, but with absolute, terrifying calm. He prepared to deliver the asymmetric response. In warfare, symmetry is predictable. You hit me, I hit you. Cassius expected a fight. He prepared for a fight, but Marcus was about to do something that Cassius's predictive models could not compute. He stepped out of his tent. The snow was falling lightly. Thousands of battle-hardened legionaries stood in formation, waiting for the order to engage. They looked at their emperor, expecting to see a god of war, clad in armor, shouting for vengeance. Instead, they saw a man. No armor, no sword, just a man in a philosopher's cloak. He was about to deliver a speech that would go down in history as He was about to weaponize the truth in a way that would dismantle the rebellion without shedding a drop of Roman blood. He took a breath, and he began to speak. This is the moment the script flips. We are standing on the banks of the Danube. The wind is biting. Thousands of Roman soldiers are gathered in a semicircle, their breath visible in the freezing air. They are gripping their pila, their heavy javelins, knuckles white with rage. They are waiting for the order to march on Syria. They are waiting for Marcus Aurelius to unleash the dogs of war. But Marcus does not scream. He does not raise his fist. He speaks in a voice that historians describe as quiet, steady, and devastatingly calm. He begins his address, te allocutio with a statement that shatters the expectations of every man in the legion. He says, "I am not here to express anger. I am here to express grief pos on that." In the hypermasculine culture of the Roman army, admitting grief could be seen as weakness. But coming from a man who has lived in the mud with his soldiers for a decade, it is not weakness. It is vulnerability. And as we know, when a strong leader displays calculated vulnerability, it does not repel followers, it magnetizes them. It creates a deep resonance that fear can never achieve. Marcus continues. He tells them that he is not afraid of Cassius. He is not afraid of the rebellion. He is afraid for Rome. He paints a picture not of a personal insult, but of a civil tragedy. He calls Cassius my old friend. He refuses to dehumanize the man who wants to kill him. And then, he drops the psychological nuclear bomb. He looks at his troops and says, effectively, if the danger is only to me, I am ready to die. If the Roman people believe that Cassius would make a better leader, if they believe he can serve the common good better than I can, then I will step down. I will yield the throne without a fight, because this empire belongs to them, not to me. This is the asymmetric response in its purest form. In game theory, this is a move that completely invalidates the opponent's strategy. Cassius's entire rebellion was built on the narrative that Marcus is a tyrant clutching to power, a weak old man who would burn the world to keep his crown. By offering to give the crown away, Marcus proves that he is not attached to it. He effectively unmasks the lie. If Marcus is willing to give power away for the greater good, then Cassius is not a liberator stealing from a tyrant. Cassius is a thief stealing from a saint. The soldiers stand, frozen. Their brains cannot process the input. They expected rage. They expected fire. Instead, they got forgiveness. The cognitive dissonance is deafening. Think of it in terms of modern artificial intelligence. The human brain is a prediction engine. Based on the input betrayal, the soldiers' neural networks predicted the output retaliation. When Marcus delivered grace instead, it caused a massive system error. It forced them to pause, reboot their understanding of the situation, and look at their emperor with new eyes. In that silence, the truth sank in. They realized that the man standing before them was operating on a level of consciousness that Cassius could not even comprehend. They realized that Marcus was the true alpha, not because he was the loudest, but because he was the only one in control of himself. Marcus ends the speech with a promise. He promises that he will not punish the soldiers who rebelled. He promises that he will try to capture Cassius alive. Not to torture him, not to execute him, but to forgive him. He says he wants to show the world that fidelity and loyalty still exists. The speech ends. There is no cheering, just a heavy, reverent silence. And then, a renewed, unbreakable resolve. The legions are no longer fighting for a paycheck. They are fighting for a philosophy. Now, watch the virus die. The text of this speech travels. In the ancient world, word of mouth was faster than fire. The message crosses the Mediterranean, it infiltrates the markets of Alexandria, it whispers through the streets of Antioch, and finally, it breaches the perimeter of Cassius's camp. Imagine the atmosphere in the rebel camp. For weeks, Cassius has been feeding his men a diet of fear and lies. He told them Marcus was dead. Then he told them Marcus was a vengeful tyrant. He kept them in a state of high cortisol, always looking over their shoulders. But now, the soldiers hear the truth. They hear that Marcus offered to step down. They hear that Marcus wants to forgive them. The choice was no longer political. It was primal. They looked at Cassius, sweating, paranoid, screaming orders, executing messengers. Then they imagined Marcus.com/forgiving, offering his own life for the empire. The contrast was blinding. One was a desperate scavenger protecting his stolen meal. The other was a king. The authority of Avidius Cassius evaporated instantly. Not because of a battle, but because he lost the moral mandate. The end comes swiftly. It always does when the illusion breaks. Cassius is sitting in his tent, likely planning his next purge. He hears footsteps. He expects a messenger. Instead, a centurion named Antoninus walks in. He is not there to take orders. He is there to correct a mistake. There is no epic duel. There is no grand final stand. It is a quick, brutal, and necessary correction of the system. Avidius Cassius, the man who would be king, is struck down by the very men he claimed to liberate. The rebellion that threatened to tear the Roman Empire apart collapses in an afternoon. It didn't take a year of siege warfare. It didn't take thousands of casualties. It was dismantled by a single speech. This proves the ultimate theorem of the anti-Machiavelli protocol. Lies are flammable. They burn hot and fast, but they consume their fuel. The truth is fireproof, but the story does not end here. In fact, the most dangerous part of the crisis is just beginning. Cassius is gone, yes, but the poison he spread is still in the system. A courier arrives at Marcus's camp. A few weeks later, he is carrying a heavy, stained sack. He enters the tent and places it on the emperor's table. He opens it to reveal the grim trophy, the remains of Avidius Cassius. The courier expects a reward. He expects the emperor to smile, to gloat, perhaps to mount the trophy on a spike as a warning to others. But Marcus Aurelius turns away. He refuses to look at it. He feels no triumph. He feels only the heavy sadness of a surgeon who had to amputate a limb to save the patient. He orders the remains to be buried with dignity. But the courier has something else, something far more dangerous than a dead rival. He places a large, sealed wooden chest on the table. "Caesar," the courier says, "this is Cassius's personal correspondence. Inside are the letters from every senator, every general, and every noble in Rome who conspired with him. We have the names, we have the proof. You can now purge the city of all your enemies." Marcus stares at the chest. Inside that box is the justification for a great purge. Inside that box is absolute security. If he opens it, he will know exactly who betrayed him. He can execute them, seize their property, and ensure that no one ever dares to cross him again. Machiavellian logic dictates that he must open it. He must know who the snakes are. Marcus places his hand on the lid. The fate of hundreds of Rome's most powerful families rests under his palm. He can feel the temptation. It is the temptation to be safe, to be certain, to use the information as a weapon. But he also knows the trap. If he opens the box, he becomes paranoid. He will look at every senator and wonder, was it you? He will create an atmosphere of terror in Rome. The conspirators, knowing they are discovered, will have no choice but to fight back. By trying to eliminate the threat, he will create a new one. He will become the very tyrant that Cassius accused him of being. This box is not a gift. It is a cursed object. It is a trap that Cassius left behind from the grave. Marcus makes a decision that defies every rule of conventional power dynamics. A decision so counterintuitive that it remains a masterclass in game theory to this day. He calls for a torch. The tent is silent. The air is thick with the smell of lamp oil and cold iron. On the table sits the wooden chest. It is the black box of treason. Inside are the names of every senator, every governor, and every friend who bet on the death of the emperor. Marcus Aurelius stands over it holding a torch. The flames cast long dancing shadows against the canvas walls. This is the ultimate test of character. A standard ruler, a Machiavellian ruler, would open the box. He would memorize every name. He would create a list, and then the purge would begin. He would rationalize it as justice. He would say he is securing the state. But in reality, he would be feeding the very beast that destroyed Cassius. That beast is paranoia. If Marcus opens that box, he lets the virus in. He will never look at his court the same way again. Every smile will look like a grimace. Every whisper will sound like a plot. He will spend the rest of his reign looking over his shoulder, ruling a city of ghosts. Marcus understands that the information inside that box is not power. It is toxic waste. He lowers the torch. The flame touches the dry papyrus. The wax seals melt. The paper curls and blackens. The fire catches, hungry and bright. He does not pull a single letter out. He does not peek at a single name. He stands there and watches the evidence of the betrayal turn into ash and smoke. Why did he do this? Was this an act of naive sainthood? Was he just being nice? No. This was the most ruthlessly calculating move of his entire reign. It was a masterclass in strategy. Think about the alternative. If he opens a box, he finds 50 names. He executes them. Their families become sworn enemies of the state. The surviving senators are terrified. They think they might be next. To protect themselves, they form a new conspiracy. They strike first. The civil war, it becomes a cycle of blood and fear. Everyone loses, but by burning the letters, he destroys the evidence. Imagine the psychology of a traitor in that moment. You were ready to die. You were waiting for the guards to kick down your door. And then, absolute silence. The emperor has declared a universal amnesty. You are not just relieved, you are indebted. You owe him your life. Your guilt binds you to him stronger than any chain. And because he does not know specifically who you are, he treats you with kindness. This forces you to become the loyal man he thinks you are. By destroying the list, Marcus turned a potential civil war into a unified peace. But there is a deeper layer here. It was not just political. It was personal. The human mind has a limit. Every grudge you hold, every suspicion you nurture, it is a heavy stone in your backpack. It drains your spirit. If Marcus had read those names, a part of his soul would be permanently trapped in that dark corner monitoring his enemies. He would have less energy for the things that actually matter, like rebuilding the empire, or fighting the plague, or writing his philosophy. By burning the letters, he was performing a hard reset on his own mind. He refused to let the poison enter. He chose to remain ignorant of the details so he could remain focused on the mission. He sanitized his own soul. As the last of the letters turned to ash, the smoke drifted out of the tent and into the cold night air. The threat was gone. Not because the enemies were dead, but because the enmity was dead. So, what is the takeaway for us? How do we apply the burning letters protocol in the modern world? We are not Roman We do not have rebel generals trying to steal our throne, but we are under attack by a different kind of warfare. We live in an economy that profits from conflict. We are constantly offered boxers of letters. It is the screenshot of a group chat where your colleagues are talking behind your back. It is the negative comment section under your work. It is the urge to stalk your ex-partner on social media. It is the gossip about who said what. Every time you choose to read the letters, you think you are gaining intel. You think you are protecting yourself, but you are not. You are letting the virus in. You open the box, and suddenly you are paranoid. You are angry. You are drafting mental arguments in the shower against people who do not matter. You are losing sleep over a sentence typed by a stranger. You are burning your limited mental energy on drama instead of your purpose. The Aurelian protocol is the discipline to look at that box, to look at that drama, that gossip, that opportunity for revenge, and call for the torch. It is the power of the block button. It is the power of saying, I do not need to know. It is the power of walking away from a petty argument even when you know you can win, because winning the argument means losing your peace. Marcus Aurelius teaches us that true power is not about controlling others. That is the trap of Cassius. That is the trap of the insecure. True power is the absolute control over your own internal state. Cassius died because he needed the world to bow to him. Marcus lived because he bowed only to his principles. The Machiavellian views life as a jungle where you must eat or be eaten. They live in fear, and they die in fear. The Aurelian view is that life is a project of character construction, and you cannot build a temple if you are constantly chasing the rats in the basement. So the next time you face a betrayal, the next time you are tempted to dive into the mud, remember the frozen banks of the Danube. Remember the chest of letters. Remember that you have a choice. You can open the box and let the war begin. Or you can light the torch, burn the noise, and get back to work. The file is closed.